Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Elim Road podcast, where on tonight's show we're going to be previewing a big game, not a huge game in light of last night's result, but a big game against Burnley at Turf Moor this Saturday. Just before we get into that though, if you haven't already listened to our Arsenal full-time show, go do so now. That episode is live across all platforms. Havertz dive, relegation picture, significance of this weekend's game, all discussed. So do go and have a listen to that before tucking into this preview. Tonight though, joining me for the full preview of the Burnley game is Joe from the TurfCast channel. Joe, mate, thanks for joining me. Hope you're well.
No, thanks for inviting me, mate. All good.
Perfect. Just before we get going, guys, remember to drop a comment down below, subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels, and also give us a follow on our socials. That's at the Elim Road on Twitter and at Elim Road Pod on Instagram. I think, Joe, I mentioned it in the intro, just before we get stuck into Brentford against Burnley, we should briefly talk about the game last night at the time of recording against Bournemouth and Luton. Good result for both of us in the grand scheme of things. Does put a lot more on the game on Saturday, especially considering Luton's game against Forest this weekend as well. Your thoughts on last night's drama?
Well, to be honest, mate, first of all, like my dad actually texted me before the match saying, "Let's hope Bournemouth win tonight." And I was like, "Dad, we are dead and buried. What is the point in even bothering?" But at half time, when they were 3-0 up, I was more annoyed at how good they were because I've got nothing against Luton, but I always use them as a yardstick because we were in the Championship together last season. But it's embarrassing that we are so far behind them. Not because it's Luton and they're a smaller club. It's nothing to do with that. It's because we romped the Championship last season. We finished 21 points above them and then went on to spend over £100 million in the summer, whereas I think they spent £4.5 million. So we shouldn't be so far behind them this season. Like, and some people always say, "Oh, it's a different year, so you can't really use it as a yardstick." Like, you can, because we're so far ahead of them. And then they have improved their squad by only £4.5 million worth of reinforcement, whereas we spent over £100 million. So the only reason why I was annoyed is because of how good they were, at how little they've spent, and they continue to defy the odds and be so good. But obviously, ultimately, yeah, it is a good result for us. But we're dead and buried in my eyes. So it doesn't affect us, really. It probably affects you more than anything, just for your anxiety levels and stuff like that. Obviously, I've been there before, obviously getting relegated a couple of years ago and you know, staying up for 8 years or whatever it was under Daesh, where we had a few squeaky bum times of nearly going down, but then ultimately not. So I do get it. But yeah, I think the bottom three as it is right now goes down. But I just... For Luton, I think it's going to be very tough psychologically to come back from that, if I'm honest. So yeah, I think they're down as well. But I've been saying that for a while.
I think you're right. And if they'd held on to that 3-0 lead, and considering the fact that Everton and Forest might get hit with more points deductions, I think it would have made for an interesting game on Saturday against Forest in terms of Luton. I mean, I want to start with Burnley's last game, 2-2 against West Ham after being 2-0 up at half time. Having watched the game and seeing the highlights on Match of the Day, you had enough chances even in the second half to go on and win the game. And the first half I thought was outstanding from Burnley. But just talk me through the second half, because it reminded me a touch of how Brentford have normalised throwing leads away this season.
It's funny because obviously we've just done a chat on my channel, and you referenced in that, like, you have the league high of throwing leads away. I genuinely thought that was us. But we've been so bad at doing it. Like, the amount of times that we went 1-0 up at Bournemouth, lost. Went 1-0 up at home to West Ham, lost. There's other examples that I can't remember. Obviously, the West Ham this weekend, 2-2. We just seem to do it every single week. Every time we get a lead, obviously on the 3 occasions where we've actually won a football game this season, we do end up throwing it away. It was just complete chalk and cheese. Like, the first half we were brilliant, and the second half, it just set the tone. We conceded after 30 seconds. 30 seconds we conceded, and you just know at that point what's going to happen. You say, you know, when we conceded after 30 seconds, I then fully expected us to get beat. I'm like, we'll be 3-2 down by the 60th minute at this rate. And thanks to VAR, for once, I can't believe I just said that sentence, we actually didn't get beat. I mean, it is offside. They score a goal that's ultimately offside, and it is offside. But I hate that. It's like one of them where it's like that, and people sit here and go, offside is offside, and it is. But there's no advantage there for the player. We shouldn't be splitting hairs for offsides like that. That might be the rule, but we shouldn't be. There should be daylight in between the two. But even then, you're going to be splitting hairs on the other side of it. But then there's more of an advantage because he's even further in front. But yeah, my gripe with the West Ham match, I know they said Saturday or on Sunday, weren't it? But my gripe with that was we were fantastic in that first half. We were brilliant. There was no reason to change it at half time because the West Ham crowd was on the team's back. They were whinging. West Ham were not getting any joy whatsoever. What does Vincent Kompany do at half-time? He makes a change for some reason, and he brings Josh Brown on, who's been dreadful this season. I can understand the thinking of bringing Josh on. He was trying to shore up the midfield because I can't remember who he took off now. Jacob Brun-Larsen, who's like a forward winger sort of player. So he's obviously trying to sacrifice a forward player for a winger and shore it up. And Brownhill wasn't involved in the mistake at all for the goal. But I just felt like, why are you changing that when the system has worked? It came out afterwards and said the cracks were starting to appear. I just think he's trying to save face. There were no cracks from what I saw. We were by far the better side in the first half. But yeah, that was my main gripe, that Kompany decided at half-time we were so good to change it, and then wonders why we then throw a goal, a 2-goal lead away. But yeah, it should have been 3 points. Ultimately, it wasn't. But, you know, I'd have took a point at the start of the game. But yeah, you don't want to throw a 2-goal lead away, obviously.
You referenced those changes at halftime, and I've seen some of your frustrations with Kompany's decision making on Twitter. I think the last time we spoke, you said the fans were still on side. Is that started to change a little bit?
Yeah, 100%. I'm still Kompany in, and I think the majority of the Burnley fan base is still Kompany in, but I think now it's probably something like a 60-40 split, whereas at the start of the season, it was everybody loved him. Like, it was 100%. I remember doing something with Sky Bet, actually, like the Sky Bet fan forum or whatever it was called, and they sent me a link of like 99% of Burnley fans currently back Vincent Kompany. I was like, how is it 99%? It should be 100 after the season we've just had. But like I said, now I think it's probably about a 60-40 split. I think I am the only bigger Burnley account that actually still backs him. And one of the lads on the podcast, on the full-time show, doesn't back him anymore. But all the other ones have fully turned now. They want him out. There's only me that's still standing by him. I just feel like I don't see the point in getting rid of him at this stage. There's 10 games left. We're obviously already down. Yes, it's been a bad season. And a lot of people's reasoning for wanting him sacked is they want somebody held accountable. Like, and everyone's always like, oh, if I did this in my office job, I'd be sacked by now. So, yeah, but this isn't an office job, is it? It's a Premier League manager, soon to be Championship manager, admittedly. Yeah, I think you've got to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. We've completely changed the style, completely changed the ethos. We've got all these players that, like, Burnley was always seen as Brexit Burnley, you know what I mean? And we only had players from the northwest of England or Iceland, you know, something like that. Whereas we now have, obviously, like your French lads, your Belgian lads, and a lot of players from all over Europe. And these players, a lot of them, when they come and join Burnley, say, Vincent Kompany convinced me to join this club. He has a vision, and he speaks about the club and the stuff that they're going to do. And all these players, if he leaves, I don't think they'll want to be here, especially if we're bringing in a manager that doesn't play in the Vincent Kompany style. Like, what would be? We've built a squad now for Vincent Kompany ball. If we then sacked him and brought in Chris Wilder, for example, that would just be utterly ridiculous. Like, I've seen some ridiculous shouts out there. Chris Wilder was a shout before he went back to Sheffield United. Gary Rowett. Like, what are you smoking if you want to sack Vincent Kompany and bring in Gary Rowett, or however you pronounce it? Yeah, for me, I'm still in, but the fan base is starting to turn. But I think it's still the majority of the fans. Every time I do a poll, for example, or on one of my lives, most people want him to stay, but a few of the big accounts now do want him out, and there's a few loud people shouting on Twitter about having him out now as well. But I think for me, just stick by him till minimum 10 games into next season. If we're like 18th in the Championship at the start of next season, then it's time for new ideas, I think.
What about the performances in recent weeks? Because there's been a few games, the last game against West Ham, even Liverpool away. I think Fofana could have had a hat-trick that day. I was watching the highlights of it.
Yeah.
He missed a lot of opportunities. Villa away as well, when I thought there was a dodgy decision that went against you, if I'm remembering correctly.
Two dodgy decisions.
And these games where I thought you've actually played quite well. So just about the performances, we mentioned it on your podcast about how performances, maybe I was a little bit out of touch to say performances down like in the relegation zone are important, but it's certainly for us, if us as Brentford fans, if we want to be confident that we're not going to get dragged into a relegation battle, then the performances I would measure is the most important thing in terms of, okay, we're not playing well. Okay, we're playing well, but we're not getting the points. The points will come if we continue to play well. But what about your performances in recent weeks?
You know what? They've not actually been that bad. We've had a couple of stinkers in there. Burnley 0, Arsenal 5. We were dreadful, but I kind of just put it down to how good Arsenal were that day. But we were dreadful on the same time. It was kind of like a mixture of both. We were crap. They were superb. But then the week after we played Palace, who I don't think had won in 2024 at that point. They had just brought in the new manager and got rid of Hodgson. So maybe they had the new manager bounce at that point. But we were so bad that day. And that was the day when it all started turning. Kompany had to go up to the fans afterwards and sort of like do that and say, like, look, I'm sorry, we're that bad and that sort of thing.
Wasn't there a red card early on in that game?
It wasn't. Yes, it was it early. I can't remember. I'll just quickly get it up on my screen. There was 35 minutes. It's relatively early, but it was the frustration with that again was I know we spoke about him on our show, and I'm sure you'll get into him again later. It was a James Trafford mistake, and who keeps picking James Trafford? Vincent Kompany, and like the fans have said time and time again, bring in Muric. It's not going to happen now. But again, it was another James Trafford clanger, so that was a frustration there. But then after that, we actually held out for a while, I think, and then just capitulated when they got the goal. But yeah, obviously going back as far as Villa, because that was quite a while back now. It was in December, but you referenced it. We played well that game. Foster was brilliant, but he's injured at the minute. Trafford actually played really well that game. But we shouldn't have had a man sent off, and they shouldn't have had a last-minute penalty. So it was all a bit ridiculous on the referee. Then there was Tottenham in the Cup, played well there. Luton at home, it finished 1-1, and I think that was the moment where we probably sealed our fate. Again, from a Trafford clanger. But we actually played very well. We actually played really well that game without really creating too much. That was the problem. City's City, but we played all right. Then there was Fulham. First half dreadful, second half brilliant. Liverpool's Liverpool, but again, we played all right. Already referenced the Arsenal and Palace games, but the main thing for me is why I'm coming into this with a little bit more confidence than I usually am. I usually say, 3-0 defeat, we're going to get battered. Is we played very well against Bournemouth, but we were dreadful at the back and dreadful up front. But Josh Cullen has come in back into the side, and he played very well in that game. And then against West Ham, we actually was decent up front and obviously got the 2 goals, 2 decent goals as well. One was an own goal, but it was a good build-up play. And obviously Fofana with an absolute brilliant strike against West Ham for that one. So maybe things 28 games into the season are finally starting to click. But we've had these false dawns before, mate. I remember earlier in the year in like September and October, we had these false dawns of thinking maybe it's clicking, and then we'll just get spanked the game after. So obviously fingers crossed for us. That isn't the case. But yeah, the last 2 performances have been brilliant. And we've been the better side against Bournemouth. Shouldn't have lost 2-0, but it's just typical Burnley. And again, against West Ham, we shouldn't have thrown the 2-goal lead away. It's just typical Burnley. So there are still issues in the squad, but the performances have been better.
You mentioned Fofana there, and I think he's probably stolen most of the headlines in recent weeks. Who else has impressed you in the last month or so whilst you guys have been playing okay?
Well, Josh Cullen's come back into the side. I think that's a massive reason why we've started playing okay again. Obviously, it was born out of Brownhill's red card that we've already referenced against Palace, which wasn't Brownhill's fault. It was a hospital ball from Trafford. Brownhill's then obviously tried to get the pass back, fouled him, and then he's sent off. So I think Cullen coming back into it, he's one of them. He's like an old school midfield general, but he plays in like the 6 role, just mopping everything up, getting the ball out to the players that'll they've got more creativity, like your Sanderbergs, your Koleoshaws. Well, not Koleoshaw because he's injured, but your Odebears, your Fofanas. Odebear, he's actually not been that good recently, but I still always like to reference him because he's a young lad, been very good this season. Came in when Koleoshaw got his injury. So he's playing well for the majority of the season. The last couple of games he's not been great. Defenders as well, like Assignon. Like there was a moment in the game against West Ham where they were attacking. They got the ball in the box. One of their defenders kind of like did that and just touched him. It was a proper minuscule touch. And then he goes down on the floor holding his face, trying to win a free kick. The referee just waves play on. He has a shot from 4 yards out. Thankfully, for some reason, blazes it over. But he has been playing very well, but there was that issue. I think Vitinho as well, like he's come in and started being played at right mid, even though he's a bit of a fullback, and he doesn't really have the quality, but he will always give his all, and I've got to respect that for him. But Sanderberg as well, he's been doing well in midfield. I feel like the main point why we've been playing well these last few games is our midfield is now better with Cullen and Sander. Because I actually quite like Brownhill, but I will be the first person to admit that he's been poor this season. Probably isn't a Premier League player, probably a good Championship player, probably one of them players that doesn't really make the step up, but is always probably good, not too good for the Championship, but a very, very good player in the Championship. So yeah, my main 2 will be Cullen and Sander. But special shout-outs for Odebear, even though he's not played that well in the last few, and Assignon, because Assignon was a fullback coming in January, and he's done very well.
Would you be confident if you were going to go down to the Championship that you'd be able to keep hold of some of those better players?
Yes, I think Fofana goes back. Obviously, he's on loan, so we're not going to buy him, and I think Chelsea hold him in high regard. I mean, look, the Burnley business model is buy young and cheap, sell after a few years' experience, and when they're older and better, and hopefully get enough money in through the books that way. Because club of our size is always going to find it difficult to compete with probably the top 12 of the Premier League these days. Obviously, you'll have similar issues, but I think because of how bad we've been this season, I can't see how many people are going to want our players.
Mm-hmm.
There's Yukoli Oshaw, who picked up a season-ending injury in like October, so he's a good player, but hopefully that means he's not at the forefront of people's minds. I know scouting systems are different, and they're not just people on YouTube and Twitter like me and you, and they will be aware of him. But obviously, they've not seen him play for a while, so they might want to see how he comes back, because it were an ACL, so it's quite a bad injury, especially for a young lad. And some people just don't come back the same, do they? Obviously, fingers crossed he does. Wilson Odebear, he's a similar player, young lad, tricky player. So somebody might come in for him. And there is some rumours that a couple of teams are looking at him, but it didn't really come from a reliable source. I'm not really worried about that. The ones that I'm more worried about are Lyle Foster, because he's injured at the minute, but he's probably our best player, or has been our best player this season. Probably close to Sander Berge, but he's fantastic. And the thing with Lyle is, I don't know if you saw it at the start of the season. I think it was around October time. He had some mental health issues and came out and said, like, look, I'm struggling, so I'm going to have some time off. Went back to South Africa. So I think that'll make people reluctant to buy him, because if you're going to invest 15, 20 million pounds in a player, you want them to be playing regularly. And if you've got any inkling that they might not be able to do so, then they probably wouldn't spend that sort of money on him. I don't think Burnley let him go for any less, really. So I think because of that, we'll end up keeping him potentially. I think Sander stays for a year in the Championship. I'd be surprised if he left straight away, but I said the same thing about Nathan Collins the last time we went down. So, yeah, I think we will lose Zeki Amdouni, and I think we will lose Mike Trezor. But them two haven't really contributed much positive energy to the season, especially Mike Trezor. That's nothing really against him. I don't think he's been given that much of a chance. He did actually play down at the G-Tech early in the season against you. I think that was the only start of the season, and he was dreadful. He just didn't look like he wanted to be there. But since then, he's never really been given the chance. There's definitely a player in there, but maybe the Premier League's just not his vibe. And I think the same with Zeki Amdouni as well. Maybe it's not the Premier League, to be fair. It could just be the fact that Burnley are in a relegation battle and you need players to roll the sleeves up, whereas them two are always trying to do fancy flicks. So I think them two leave. And if bids come in, like I've slagged Trafford off, but I do still think he will be highly sought after. Maybe not this summer, but maybe in future summers. But somebody could take a punt on him this summer, especially if... Because there's been, I don't think he will, but there's been some talk on places like TalkSport and stuff like that they should call him up to the England squad in the third choice keeper, because the third choice keeper is just nothing. They don't do anything. They're just there. So there's been a few calls for that, just to give him the experience. So if that happened, for example, we could be like, hey, 30 million quid, and someone could take a punt on him, but he's been pretty poor. So you'd have to take a massive risk on him if you were going to do that. So I think we'll lose a couple, but I think we'd keep hold of the core of the squad. And I do think we're in a better position now this season at this stage than what we were this season. We went down, if that makes sense, because we lost a lot of players that year, and we all expected to, because a lot of the contracts were running out.
I want to ask you, you're kind of speaking as if you've already gone down. And my next question was let's talk relegation, big picture, where you are with it. Even if the points deductions come in, say you get a win on Saturday, points deductions come in, Forest get deducted 6, Everton get another 1. Are you still not confident in about maybe surviving relegation?
I mean, for me, I'll just quickly get the Premier League table back up again. But I think if we are in any chance, like, look, obviously we're on 14 points now, as I said earlier. That's a point every 2 games, which is atrocious. If Forest lose 6, that puts them on 18, and obviously we'd be on 17 at that point. So potentially, yeah, but we'd have to win. I think there's 10 games left. I think we have to win 5, and we've won 3 all season. So it's a massive turnaround in terms of form from us, and I've not really seen where that will come from. Yes, the performances have been better, but we're still making mistakes at the back, and we're still a little bit... I've described our season as toothless up front, spineless at the back, because we've been decent in midfield, and that's not really changed. Even though we've been playing better recently, and we were better up front against West Ham, we're still spineless at the back and making mistakes at the back. The first goal, for example, and even the second goal, Trafford should do better for it. So no, even with the deduction, we'd have to look at Forest getting a -10, for example, or a -9, and Everton getting another -6. But I'm at the stage now where I'm not adamant we're going down, that I don't want these point deductions to come in, because if Forest get -10, for example, I think we still go down. Put it this way, if Forest get -10, they would still be above us. That's how bad we've been this season. But I think that in turn will keep Luton up. And I've got to think about next season now. So I'm thinking about next season. It might sound like mental to people listening to this, but in my head, it's 4D chess. But I see next season as a big one. We have to bounce back. And if Burnley, Sheffield United, and Luton go down, we're all going to be shopping in the same pool of players. And out of them 3 clubs, when you can either go to Sheffield United and be managed by Chris Wilder, or you can go to Luton Town, who, yes, they've been good this season, and Rob Edwards has, he's earned a lot of credit, but I still would back us, a Burnley team with a lot of young up-and-coming talent. I still would back players to choose us and Vincent Kompany over them too. Mm-hmm. So I think, for example, if Everton end up coming down and they've got this big, shiny new stadium on the horizon and they're probably going to easily win the league, and we're shopping in the same pool as them, same with Forest, because them two are traditionally bigger clubs than us and will potentially have more money than us next season. Potentially not, obviously, that's why they're in the trouble that they're in. But I think players are probably more likely to choose them. So in my weird warped mind, I'm hoping that the points deductions come in next season and then we can just go down, be happy, sign a load of players again, and then hopefully HMS Pissa Championship is in full force again next season.
I think you're right about the company pool, for sure, in terms of when you're in the Championship. Yeah. I think a name like that, especially buying into the system, you mentioned it on your podcast, in terms of the way he plays, the fact that he's played under Pep, and the football that Burnley now play, it would be, I think, a more attractive prospect to go to Burnley than either one of Luton or Sheffield. Let's move on to the game on Saturday. Do you think the players are going to be buoyed by the result against West Ham, or does the manner of the draw, being 2 goals up at half time and then eventually drawing 2-2, does that negate that feeling?
I think for fans it negates it, but I have tried to take a step back and say that I have been happy with the performances. And if we play like we have done against West Ham and Bournemouth, we could pick up something against Brentford, because West Ham are 7th, and obviously you're looking over your shoulder a little bit. I do think you'll be fine. So if we can play well against West Ham and get 2 against West Ham, and try and cut out the silly errors at the back, then hopefully we can do it against you on Saturday. It's one of them. It can go one or 2 ways, can't it? Excuse me. And I think with a young squad, it could potentially negate it. But all the noise is coming out of the club in the interviews. Oh yeah, we're really buoyed by it. We've been playing better. They're going to say that. Obviously, they're not going to sit there and say, yeah, we're really disappointed and now we don't really want to play Brentford. So we'll see. I think because we have a young squad, I do always worry about that, if I'm honest. The fact that the season's been so poor, and maybe even the hangover will go into next season because the squad is so young. So it'll be interesting. I'm hoping they can take solace from the fact that the 2 performances have been much better and they have started to look like a team again rather than a bunch of disjointed individuals. So hopefully, yeah. But again, I'm not going to sit here confidently and say that they're going to be buoyed by it, to be honest, because it's such a young squad.
I want to ask specifically about the game, and also I do want to mention Ben Mee and Nathan Collins. I think we'll do that at the end because we've had a little chat about them on your podcast, and it will be interesting. I know that Brentford fans listening to this will be interested to hear your take, especially on Nathan Collins. But what have you made of Brentford's slump this season?
I've been surprised by it. I thought you'd kick on. And you've got some good players there. Like I like Norgard, I like Mbeumo. Obviously, I love Ben Mee. You've got some good players in there. Obviously, Tony's brilliant, but he's been missing half of the season. And I think I asked you this question, didn't I? But I am surprised you haven't kicked on from last season, and you're now again looking over your shoulder rather than pushing on, because you've got a good manager, you've got good players. One thing I've always noticed, and it's become like a bit of a running joke between Burnley and Brentford because of that famous video of Phil and is it Andy when they're celebrating like they won the Champions League. But that you had a togetherness then, though, didn't you? And I always felt like that close knit community stadium. It used to be called that, didn't it? The Brentford Community Stadium. I didn't mean it like that, but that close knit sort of like community feel within the stadium was not something I was jealous of, but was something that we used to have as well under the Dyche era before it all started turning sour. So I felt like that was something that propelled you and worked in your favour, especially at home. But I'm surprised to see you so bad this season. But I do think a lot of that is to do with the fact you've been missing Tony for so long. I think that would have created a bit of a storm in a teacup in Brentford, and then players would have been wondering what were going on and things like that. And it's never great to have negative stuff like that around any club, even if you are if you have done well and stuff like that. But you can probably, I'm surprised to see it, is what I'm trying to say. But when I look at it, and I look at all the reasons why, because you've got a lot of injuries as well, I can probably understand it, actually. And I think now the best thing for you guys would just be to keep your head above water, excuse me, stay in the league, which I think you will, and then reassess next year. You could potentially, you will lose Tony. You could potentially lose Frank as well, as you mentioned on my podcast, depending on the managerial merry-go-round and stuff like that. And I do worry for you next season if that does happen. Excuse me. But I just think for now, get your head above water, stay in the Premier League, and then hopefully kick on next year with potentially a new manager and a new star striker.
For sure. I think all Brentford fans are now just waiting for this season to end. It's just been awful. You mentioned the injuries. It's not been fun. The thing is, I want to get your take on this. Maybe we've kind of chatted about on our podcast about how, and I've heard some people say, "Oh, I wouldn't mind if we go down and prefer it in the Championship anyway." I'm in the boat of they're not being serious, just because. Even now, I mean, to you guys, because you've been in the Premier League for a while, it must be different for Burnley fans. But I still go to the away games now, and I'm going to these stadiums every week, and it's like, Jesus, I still feel pretty lucky to be doing this compared to where we started out. But I do miss winning every week, which is what we used to do in the Championship, especially in those last 2 seasons. Whereas now, especially in this season, it's just been like, how much are we going to lose by today, or how many points are we going to throw away from a winning position? So I'd love to get your take on that just before we start on Ben Mee and Nathan Collins.
Well, obviously, we were in the Prem for so long and then went down. And I agree with you. I would never sit here and say, oh, I'm glad we're going down because the Championship's better. It is better in terms of entertainment, but it's better because you're winning every week. If you're Stoke City, who used to be an established Premier League side, or Norwich and Watford, who came down with us, Watford especially, who are now, 16th, 17th in the Championship, even looking over the shoulder, that's not enjoyable. People who have been in the Premier League look back on the Championship with fond memories because the last time they were in it, they got out of it. That's why they're in the Premier League. So, I mean, I always try to reference it by saying my favourite ever season. I'm 36 now. My favourite ever season following Burnley was last season because we won every week. We were so good to watch. We were brilliant. We won the league at Blackburn, for God's sake. It's never, stuff like that's just not going to happen again. Like, so many things had to fall into place for us to win the league where we won it. Like, we had to lose matches at home against relegation teams. I'm not saying we did it on purpose, but we should have won the league the week before at home against QPR, but we didn't. We got beat. Then we played Blackburn 3 or 4 days later, beat them. Wasn't the best performance, but who cares? Won the league at Blackburn. And not only that, both Burnley and Blackburn got to the FA Cup quarterfinals, which is just unheard of. And then the game was actually meant to be that weekend against them. So it was meant to be like 6 weeks earlier than that, but they had to move it back. So we would have just had a normal win there. So for us to do what we did last year is my favourite ever season. And this has probably been my worst ever season because it's just, even the year we went down under Daesh, we were battling. We were in games. We're just not in games anymore. We're turning up expecting to get beat the majority of weeks, putting in really bad performances. But I will always stand by the fact that it is better to be in the Premier League because you want to dine at the top table. You want to be amongst the elite. Like, yes, I'm not really starstruck by these stadiums anymore because I've done it so much. But I just want to be mixing it with the best because they're the best. And you want to be dining at the top table. You always should have ambitions to be the best. And I feel like fans might take entertainment into it rather than wanting to be the best. But I want Burnley to be as good as they can be. I want Burnley to be in the Premier League. I don't want to go down this season. I'm looking forward to next season if it's as good as last season. But there's always that worry that you end up like a Stoke or a Watford, or even worse, like a Villa or a Leeds or a Sunderland and going all the way down, and hopefully Blackburn again this season, going all the way down into League One. And some clubs don't come back. Like Derby is still in there, for example. Portsmouth look like they're finally getting out of it. Even Bolton went all the way down to League Two. So there is that worry. But yeah, I understand what people mean when they say it, because it is more entertaining to be in that league because you are more likely to win every week. But you should want to be the best or as good as you can be, or for your football team, as good as you can be. I guess it's a mentality thing more than anything. If you're the type of person that's just happy to course through life and you're not overly bothered about your status or your job or anything like that, and you're just happy to pick up a wage and stuff like that, you're probably like, yeah, it's better in the Championship. But if you're an ambitious person, you want your club to be ambitious as well. I don't know. Maybe I'm just overthinking it with that last sentiment. But for me, I agree. It's more entertaining in the Championship. but you want your club to be as good as it can be, right? You want your club to be amongst the elite.
For sure. I'm looking at Brighton and Villa and West Ham in Europe this season, and then seeing like how close we were last season. I want that, and just to have one season in Europe.
We had a very, very, very minuscule taste of it. You know what? It annoys me so much because we finished 7th, and that now would be what, a Conference League or still a Europa League, depending on, I don't know how it works anymore because obviously we're nowhere near it. But then our draw was Aberdeen, who were already 4 or 5 games into their season. We haven't even played a friendly, but that time we played them, but we scraped through it. Istanbul Başakşehir, who had Gael Clichy, Adebayo, all these older players, but good players, we scraped past them. And then the most decorated side in the history of Greece in Olympiakos. You see Celtic getting these teams like Slovenian painters and decorators, and obviously they win 6-7-0. So I was a little bit frustrated with it, but I went to the Aberdeen game and I went to the Olympiakos game, and yeah, it's fantastic. And I would love to see that back again. There's no reason, because West Ham obviously are a big club, Villa are a big club, but when you see clubs like Brighton in there who 10 years ago were playing at the Withdean Stadium, for example, like people forget how small Brighton actually are. And that's not a dig, it's a compliment to them is what I'm trying to say. And the fact that they are so well run these days and are mixing it with these European clubs, that tells me that the likes of Burnley and Brentford and stuff like that can actually do it. If you ran well enough, you can do it, because there's that many mismanaged big clubs now that these smaller clubs can do it. So I agree. I think the best way to do it next time for us would be to win a cup, because that's the one thing I've not seen Burnley do. I just want to see them win a major honour, and then I'll be a happy man. I'll die a happy man. But yeah, I agree with that. I think to how close you were last season, that's what I was saying earlier. I expected you to then kick on, but unfortunately for you guys, you haven't. But I agree. Be in the Prem, dine at the top table, and try and kick on for me.
Yeah. Let's talk to me about Ben Mee and Nathan Collins, because I think we said something, I said something on your pod that you thought was interesting. So talk to me first about Nathan Collins. And I will say that Ben Mee, I think in the eyes of a lot of Brentford fans this season, he's been in and out of injury, but when we have seen him, probably not as sharp as he was last year, considering, but I mean, to be fair to him, last year he was one of our better players, if not the best player. Which was a real surprise. But yeah, just talk to me about those two players.
Yeah, obviously, just start with Ben Mee first, because I've got a lot of time for Ben. Ben would be my dream podcast guest, if I'm honest with you. I'd love to get Ben on TurfCast. He is a modern Burnley legend. He always stood up for what was right. You know what? It's funny actually, because I probably wouldn't say this on my own podcast because I get too much backlash, which is annoying. But I've stood up. I've stood up for this sort of thing before. But do you remember the White Lives Matter banner that flew over the Etihad from a Burnley fan who doesn't even go on the games, by the way, just some prick who's from the town. Ben Mee came out and spoke to the press afterwards and basically said, "This isn't good enough. This isn't what we're about. This does not represent Burnley." And my feelings for Ben, I already loved him, but this skyrocketed at that moment. I was like, yes, Skipper, you stand up for what's right. You will get backlash, and he got backlash off some Burnley fans, the BNP, sort of like old school Burnley fans and stuff. And he didn't care, and that's what I loved about him. He just stood up for what he felt was right, and that made him an even better legend in my eyes. But what I'm trying to say is he's a brilliant footballer. Yes, probably the wrong side of 30 and on his way down now rather than on his way up. I think we experienced his best years, and I'll always be grateful for what Ben did as a player. The best way to sum Ben up is as a clip when we were in the Championship under Dash in just one of the bog standard seasons. I don't even think we went up that year. It was just a normal season. He was still quite young. He was in the box and he was on the floor, and I can't remember who it was, but a Reading player was about to shoot. And what does Ben do? He throws his face in the way of the shot, and it hits his face and it goes over. Like, he will literally put his body on the line, and he's proven that for the badge on his shirt. And yes, I was gutted to see him leave, but I've never had any issues with Brentford. And I'd rather him go to a club like Brentford, than a club with some stuck-up fans, like your Villas and stuff like that. Not that Villa can't stand him, to be fair, because he once won the ball against a player of theirs.
When we played,
that player unfortunately got injured, and it's just ridiculous. Like, he didn't do anything wrong.
When we played Villa, Ben Mee got sent off, and we did a preview and a post match, and there was so many Villa fans that watched it in the comments saying, "Ben Mee, you got what you deserve. You've not learned from when you ruined Wesley's career all those years."
That's it, Wesley. Yeah, and you know what?
That was his second red card in his whole career.
That's what I mean. Like, people see him as this dirty player, but he's just not. He goes into tackles with aggression and with force, but they're perfectly timed, and he wins the ball. With Wesley, it's kind of like, the thing is, it's one of them tackles that probably would be outlawed now, but this is 6-7 years ago, and it was fine then. He wins the ball. It's kind of like a scissor tackle. So the referees these days will probably be like, it's probably endangering an opponent. But even now when I watch it, because I'm more old school, I still look at that. I think that's fine tackle. It's unfortunate that Wesley then falls down, hits the hoardings, and breaks his leg, and he was never the same player again. But that's not Ben's fault. Like, you're there, you take the risk when you cross the white line. You're there to play the game. You're there to play football. Everybody knows you're going to get injured, even at Sunday League level. Like, you're going to pull a hammy or something, or potentially even, break a leg again. So yeah, I just find it pathetic from Villa fans that they're still doing that. But Wesley didn't help the situation. He's done interviews since then, sort of like slagging Ben off, and it's just pathetic. But it's good to see City fans hold him in high regard, even though, I don't think he ever played. He might have played some minuscule games for City, but then obviously he came to us as a youngster. We hold him in very high regard. It's good to see him be held in high regard at Brentford as well. Walking legend. I'd love to see him back at Burnley in some capacity at some stage. Probably not as a player, because I don't think he'd suit the company style, but maybe in a coaching role, because obviously he did a bit of managerial stuff towards the end of his last season at Burnley, to be fair. Nathan Collins is a bit different, Nathan. I don't have anything against him, but he's obviously only young, 22 at the minute. When he was at Burnley, he was 20. And we signed a young up-and-coming defender, and he looks like a young defender. Like, he would make mistakes every now and then. But the thought process was always... James Tarkowski and Ben Mee would be our number one defenders, and Nathan Collins would be like their understudy. And then in a few years, he would be promoted to the defenders. Similar to what we did with Tarky when we bought him from you, actually. Mm-hmm. He was beneath Michael Keane and Ben Mee at that point. And then when Michael Keane went to Everton, we then promoted him to the first team, and then he never really looked back. He's absolutely brilliant defender. But that was a plan with Collins. But Tarky got injured that year and actually had to have a few games out. Then Ben got injured, so Nathan Collins ended up playing quite a few games that year, probably 20, something like that, especially towards the end. But it's weird, like, because you're always looking at him thinking he's only 20. He's going to get better, but every 2 or 3 games he'd drop a clanger. Like, there'd be a silly mistake, and then you're just expecting him to say. You're expecting him to get better as he's getting older, but obviously we've just spoken about him on our show, and you're still saying the same things about him now. Like, oh, he's young, he'll get better and stuff. So maybe I think at 22 now, and obviously Brentford fans, this is more of a Brentford issue than a Burnley issue. But at 22 now, he's got to start realizing his potential rather than being potential. But my obviously I've just told the story to you again on my pod. But my overriding memory of Nathan Collins is biggest game of the season a couple of years ago, last day of the season. Norwich are down, Watford are down. It's between Burnley and Leeds. Who's going to go down? Leeds are at Brent. Thank you for that, by the way. You should have beat them. Cheers. I forgot it with you. Obviously, Leeds win at Brentford. Fair enough. After Leeds Brentford already spanking him earlier here. What does Nathan Collins do? In the first 15 minutes of the game, the cross comes in. There's no danger. For some reason, he just slaps it with his hand. Just smacks it. Penalty to Newcastle. We go 1-0 down early on. Obviously get beat. Obviously get relegated. But that just sums him up perfectly. Big game. Nerves probably got to him. Makes a mistake. Drops a clanger. And then, in the summer, leaves. So thanks for that, Nathan. Enjoy your time at Wolves. But yeah, I feel like for now, for Nathan, he needs to be starting to realise his potential rather than just being potential.
Yeah, for sure. I want to see... I think you're right. He has got a lot of potential, and I think a lot of Brentford fans would agree that he's got the potential there. But just in terms of those mistakes, we've kind of said that he's either really good or really bad. There's no in between, and he does have the propensity to drop a clanger, which in recent weeks has led to us dropping points. I am really sorry about that Leeds game as well, by the way. I would have loved nothing more than to send Leeds down. I hate that fan base. I
think the entire footballing world was pretty annoyed with you, not just Burnley fans.
I can't lie. That was a sad day, especially because we were completely out of it. We had the chance to send Leeds down, but anyway. Let's go on to score predictions, mate. The reverse fixture gives me a bit of confidence. Luton's result last night puts a little less on the game, but it's still important considering they play Forest on Saturday. If you guys were to get a win, we'd still be right in amongst it. So score predictions, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yes, I know you've just referenced the earlier game. I was at that, and we were dreadful. You were quite good. I feel like your press was what ruined us that day. I seem to remember you getting one of the goals directly from the press, Sander dallying on it for too long, potentially even 2. But we have improved a lot since then. Sander's now a better midfielder. I think we are a better side than what we were then. We've gelled a lot more. The last 2 performances have been very good. We started to look better up front in the West Ham game. Still a little bit shaky at the back, and that is what worries me. But obviously, you said earlier on my show that Tony hasn't been playing too well. So my confidence has come back a little bit after you saying that, to be fair. However, after the season that we've had, I'm reluctant to predict a win. So I'm going to sit on the fence slightly, but go with a 1-1.
Fair enough. I'm hoping we've had this conversation in the last podcast. I think it's not a must win, but it's definitely a don't lose game. So I would definitely take a point. I'm hoping for a 2-1 win. And now that I've said Ivan Toney hasn't been playing too well, I'm hoping that he scores both goals.
Bound, yeah.
But yeah, that's a good point to wrap things up. The Eden Road podcast will be back next week to obviously go over the Burnley result and also look ahead to the remaining Premier League fixtures as we attempt to survive relegation. We'll also have a special episode with a special guest coming out over the international break, so do keep your eyes peeled for that. Just before we go, guys, remember to drop a comment down below with your thoughts ahead of the Burnley game. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels and also give us a follow on our socials. That's at the Eden Road on Twitter and at Eden Road Pod on Instagram. Joe, mate, it's been a pleasure. Good luck on Saturday.
Thank you, mate. Thanks for inviting me.